This is a video about intuitive versus sensing, how to tell them apart within yourself and within other people. So first of all, there are a few stereotypes about intuitive versus sensing. That intuitive is more intelligent or more theoretical, so if someone likes to read, then they must be intuitive or something, which is just rubbish and not about what the trait is. So the trait is about whether you preference the past experience, the present experience, or the future experience. So senses are split between introverted sensing and extroverted sensing. Introverted sensing is in the SJs, and extroverted sensing is in the SPs. So introverted sensing for the SJs is about preferencing the past, meaning that they want to follow more established methods, and it can basically be summed up as, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Change might be better, change might be worse, but it's generally relatively safe to just do what you know works. They don't tend to look for change for the sake of it. They can change if there's a compelling reason to, but they don't tend to want to do things just to do something different. They tend to be very strong on family loyalty because the people who raised them, that's a very long chunk of time of past experience, and that tends to mean a lot to them. And they also tend to be very strong on the importance of history in general, because the past is the best indicator of what will happen to them. So then extroverted sensing in the SPs is more interested in the present and what's happening in very recent history and in the very recent future, because obviously you can't really live second to second. That's absurd. But very much in the recent period of time is where they're more interested in what's the immediate future look like, what does the immediate past look like, and really trying to base stuff off of that. They are looking for a bit of change now and again, just for the sake of it, just to do something different. They don't tend to want to lock down their future into one path, because who knows what will happen. That can feel very constricting because they're looking out options. They tend to be stronger on friendship loyalty than family, because it tends to matter more what people mean to them now rather than what they've done before. Again, it's not that if you get them coffee 3 minutes later they'll forget or something, but if you bought them coffee 3 years ago, it probably doesn't mean that much to them anymore. So friends from school they no longer see because they moved or whatever are a nice memory, but they just tend to move on from things that are no longer relevant to them right now or are likely to come up again. And they tend to like freedom in general and options, and options for the future rather than locking down a future. The intuitives are all future, but split between introvert intuition and extrovert intuition. Introvert intuition is the NJs, and introvert intuition is about one future. They are looking to predict the one outcome in the future, and they are looking for what is the result of behavior now. That's what they really care about, is what is the final outcome of the chain of events. They will base that outcome on the past somewhat, so they did this before and this led to this outcome, so I think it's going to lead to this outcome again. Kind of like the senses, but they are looking for a bit more change than the senses, and they are expecting a bit more change than the senses. They want improvements, and they tend to think change will be for the better. So they're more willing to try something new that's a bit more untested and hasn't been done before and would require more change and learning more things and could go wrong, because they think newer will be better and long term it will be better, even if it might be a bit painful in the short term. They're thinking really long term. Extrovert intuition is about multiple future. Not so much looking to predict what will happen, but looking for future possibilities and trying to see all of the future possibilities that could happen and keeping those open. They don't just want one outcome, but they want options. They tend to have multiple ideas about what they could do, and they're never going to follow through on all of them, and they don't really want to, but they just like having the options, so if something goes wrong, they've got backups. Extroverted sensing and extrovert intuition are sometimes kind of hard to tell apart. They're both perceivers, obviously. Extrovert intuition is NP, extrovert sensing is SP. And they both want options, and they both want freedom, and they both don't want to lock down, just want future, because they are perceivers. And also extroverted sensing pairs with introverted intuition a bit later, so that kind of future planning can resonate a bit to people who are extroverted sensors, and it can be a bit hard to tell that apart from extrovert intuition. But the way to tell is that extroverted sensing is a bit more present and really doing what makes sense now and worrying about the future a bit later. Worrying about the long-term future a bit later. It's more like, what is the short-term future? What do I need to do to get through that? And then long-term, well, we'll see what happens when we get there. Whereas extrovert intuition is a bit more attached to future possibilities in longer-term futures and doing what makes sense to keep those future possibilities alive, and is a lot more reticent to let go of future possibilities, even if they're not that likely or achievable, because you're just losing options. Whereas extroverted sensing tends to want to narrow down options a bit more based on what we know now and what are a few good options that look good now, and kind of plan around that to keep a few of those options open, but are not necessarily trying to keep as many options open as extrovert intuition. Then there's also the stereotype element. People have a few ideas about telling apart sensing from intuition by saying extroverted sensing is more tactile and adventurous, and extrovert intuition is more in their heads, and people can think that the extrovert intuition is the academic version of the perceiver, and then extroverted sensing is the athletic version of the perceiver, which is silly, because yes, extroverted sensors can like sport, they can also hate sport. Extroverted intuitives can love sport, they can also hate sport. It doesn't matter. People also say that extroverted sensing is about like intense experience because they're, living here and now. I don't think I've met an extroverted sensor who would really describe anything like that. They'll say they're not thinking a ton about the future and they're waiting to see what happens before they lock something down, but they're not like, wow, everything's so intense. It just doesn't happen. There's no relation to mountain climbing. Like, that's another stereotype, that extroverted sensors all want to go outside and climb mountains. And maybe, sure, but you could also be an extrovert intuitive who likes mountain climbing. It doesn't make a difference. It's not about theoretical versus practical. That gets thrown around a lot, that sensors are more practical and then intuitives are more theoretical, which I think comes from the idea that sensors are basing stuff off here and now, and that's more practical or something. But there are intuitives who suck at math and sensors who are great at it, and vice versa. It just doesn't tell you anything. People can also think, if you think about the future, that's smarter. So the intuitives are smarter. Not really. Because whatever you do, there's flaws. If you think about now, so the extroverted sensing approach of just do what makes sense now, you obviously run the risk of not thinking through long-term future, and that goes wrong. If you think about the future, and like with the extrovert intuitive approach, trying to keep a lot of options open, you can not take options now to keep all these options open when the option you could have taken at that time point would have been great and would have helped you or would have made everything okay, whereas now you don't have any of the options you thought you would for whatever reason, and you missed your chance. So, it doesn't really... There's no magic one way to get the outcome you want. Everything can go wrong. It's just kind of about what you pick and understanding what it is you do by default and what tends to make most sense to you. And then maybe realizing, okay, this is what I do by default. Is that really what I want to do in this situation? Because maybe it's not actually the best idea in this case. So, I hope that clears things up for you.